Hello! Today's video is coming to you from my office, and it is Halloween, so it's also coming to you in costume. I'm dressed as Zora Neale Hurston today, a prominent black female author in the country. She was gained notoriety in the 30s and 40s, and so sort of a throwback to an era that not a lot of people think about when they think about prominent black figures. There's sort of like slavery, and you've got all of those big names, and then there was sort of this dead period of Jim Crow and stuff like that nobody really likes to talk about. And then there's Rosa Parks, which I actually had students think that I was Rosa Parks today. Different hat, different black lady. But that's been my favorite part about this costume, actually. And what I'm hoping to do with future costumes, sort of pulling attention to these prominent female figures in our country that don't get a lot of attention. And for every question about my hat that I get today, or every inquiry about my costume, that's another Google search. That's somebody else looking up Zora and learning about her. So I have a Zora quote I'll actually share a little bit later, but I want to jump right into the theme of today's video, which is why I do this, essentially. Why I talk about issues involving race. So it's sort of it's a really personal topic for me, which might seem kind of strange because all of my topics are personal in their own way. Like the race issue itself is really personal, but talking about why I discuss race is like an extra layer to the whole Black Out Loud project. So this is take 3 right now, because in my second one I got really long-winded and then my phone just ran out of storage space. And in the first one I got kind of emotional. So we'll see. This one might be long-winded and emotional. I don't know. But whatever the result is, I'm hoping that it's something that people will appreciate. Sort of tying into why I do this, it actually sort of connects pretty well to the last couple of videos too, because 2 videos ago I had that silent me holding up quotes video where I was asking people to choose the topics for the next one, and my assumption 2 weeks later was that there had been no comments, and that conversations just sort of gradually led me towards the topic of knowledge, and so that prompted the last video. But then I learned after the fact that there were comments, and I just didn't know how to YouTube. So now I found the comments, and the most prominent comments for which topic people wanted to hear discussed actually is one of the #1 reasons why I do what I do in the Black Out Loud series, and that is triggers. My triggers are my teachers. And that's so true to this project, because the very first Black Out Loud video was actually filmed because I was triggered, because I was coming out of a conversation about racism. Specifically a conversation where I got called racist because of the fact that I was trying to call out racist behavior. It prompted this whole reverse racism thing that we'll get to in a little bit. But yeah, I was triggered, and that's what prompted the very first Black Out Loud video. And so in the process, my ultimate goal was just for myself, was to film myself talking about the process and sort of keep it as a record for me to look at and think about, and maybe reframe how I approach those types of conversations in the future. And that happened. It was great for that. But what also happened is that it prompted a lot of other conversations. And the video was shared, and a lot of other people have talked about it since, and the learning continues. And so the whole Black Out Loud project is an example of triggers being teachers. The things that upset you the most, when you stop and investigate, why does this upset me? What can I learn from this process? That's learning. That's development. That's growth. And that's probably one of the #1 reasons why I do this. So that's my little moment on triggers. But progressing down towards the list of why I do Black Out Loud, why I do this whole thing. I mentioned in that first conversation where I got triggered that I got told that I was racist, that I was exhibiting racist behavior by calling out racist behavior. And that sort of leads to another reason why I do what I do, which is to clarify those lines. Because I believe that it's not that simple. I believe that racism is founded, it's based out of an institution, right? It's based out of historical mistreatment of marginalized populations, predominantly people of color. And so part of why I do what I do and why I call out the things that I call out is I'm trying to make clear how ingrained that is. Because it's a layer that I can see because I've experienced it. And so my attempt is to sort of share my experiences or share my perspective on race in an effort to make it really clear to people where those lines are and how to be on the right side of the line, essentially, and how to not be somebody that's only furthering the problem. But I do get that. I get people telling me that they think I'm furthering the problem by discussing race. And my response to them is usually twofold, which is, I understand what you're saying. Like, don't feed a misbehavior, essentially. Like, don't feed the whining child in the corner. But that's all well and good when it's just a whining child in the corner and all they want is your attention. That's one thing. But when that whining child in the corner is acting out of blatant disregard for your feelings or outright malice, when their goal is to actually hurt you, then you can't ignore that. And so that's where a lot of my impetus for these types of things comes out of, that I don't believe that the racism of today is benign. I don't believe that racism is gone. I don't believe that you can just ignore it and that it will go away, because it's more than just words. I get a lot of people, because of a lot of times the things that I comment on have to do with the language people use, I get a lot of people saying to me, they're just words. We have bigger fish to fry. Why are you getting all tied up in knots about words? And what I tell those people typically is that it's the same concept as the whiny child in the corner, right? It wouldn't be a big deal if they were just words, but these words carry history, and they carry weight, and they carry hatred, a lot of them outright hatred. And so it's important to sort of distinguish, again, drawing that line between ignorance of the system as it's been created to marginalize people of color and outright malice. And wanting to make sure that people know what the structures are in place and how to step outside of them and move society forward in a better way. So think about, the most offensive word out there to describe people of color, right? The mystical, terrible N-word. It's not just a bad word because it sounds gross, It's not just a bad word because it's vulgar. It's a bad word because of the weight that it carries, because of the fact that it's a word that was used for countless lynchings, beatings, killings, rape, straight up torture of people of color, people who look like me, for hundreds of years. That's why that word is so terrible. We don't really use that word anymore, right? People don't really use that word because they know that now. They know that that word's really bad, and so they avoid it. But it's been rebranded in a way, right? It's like it's a spectrum. On the really far end of the spectrum, you've got the crazy N-word wielding racists that are really, really intense and terrifying. And then you gradually work your way down the spectrum, and you've got sort of this middle-of-the-road group of people that are now using the word thug. And that's the new N-word. It's not as abrasive, but it's still used to describe people of color derogatorily, derisively, and occasionally in violence. That's the word used to describe young black men everywhere that apparently deserve to die. I mean, think of the Loud Music case, which is so terrible. His name was Jordan Davis. Think about that case. An older man hears a group of young black men playing rap music in a car, and he says to his wife or his significant other or whoever she was, "I'm sick of hearing that thug music." Walks out to the car, asks them to turn it down. Group of young teenage boys doing what they usually do, getting a little bit belligerent and refusing to turn the music down. He shoots every single one of them, killing Jordan Davis. He's going to jail for the rest of his life. But think about how he felt his actions were justified. He used that word, thug, because that's an acceptable word to describe the type of behavior he thought he was seeing. And in his mind, that type of behavior was dangerous, or at least threatening enough for him to pull out a gun and murder somebody. So those words carry weight. It's not just about words, because these words carry weight. Let's look at it another way. If you don't believe those words carry weight, or even if you do believe they carry weight, but you don't think that it's that big of a deal or anything that we really have to worry about, let me present this another way for you. Emotional abuse. We all know what that is, right? Like, there are textbooks written on what emotional abuse is. We know that emotional abuse involves isolation, insults, and essentially denying a person's feelings to the point that they feel crazy, that they feel like no one understands where they are or what's going on in their lives, so they don't talk to anybody. There's no trust. They're depressed. Substance abuse happens. Suicide happens. And all because of emotional abuse. And that's something that in our country we take very seriously, right? Our young people growing up in their health classes will talk about different types of abuse, and emotional abuse is one of them. It is as dangerous as physical or sexual abuse. Racism today is not as physical as it once was. It's not as visceral as it once was. I mean, that still happens, but it's in smaller pockets, right? It's not as prevalent in that way. It's emotional now. Racism today is emotionally manipulative. Racism today is emotional abuse. And when you're talking about the result being suicide, substance abuse, depression, general self-destructive behaviors, that's real. Those are real problems. That's a real result of words. Things that we think aren't that important, aren't that big of a deal, those carry real results. There are medical studies that show that women of color are more likely to have premature babies, high-risk pregnancies, because of the stress that they're under. And when they ask these women of color what their number one stressor is, racism tops the list. So it is literally, the stress of racism is literally being carried generation to generation. And it's affecting the health of our children. So that's why I do this, because I couldn't be quiet about it anymore. Because I couldn't look at the world and see all of the destruction that was happening on this integral, manipulative, seedy level and let it go anymore. I couldn't do that. I feel a responsibility to inform people that this racism that existed long, long ago and was physical and terrifying and awful, yeah, it still exists back here, but it's taken on a new face now, and that face is just as terrifying, and that face has to be addressed. So, to lighten it up a little bit, I mentioned there was a Zora Neale Hurston quote that I wanted to share. And that's sort of like the third reason why I do this. The Zora Neale Hurston quote has to do with racism, and essentially what she said about it was that it boggled her mind, it baffled her, because she couldn't understand why someone would want to relieve themselves of the pleasure of her company. And essentially that's the third reason why I do this. If number one is so that I can learn something, my triggers are my teachers, and number two is so that other people can learn something because I can't keep quiet about it anymore, and these aren't just words. Number three is curiosity. I'm legitimately curious for what it is that makes people tick on the level of discussing race, and what it is that makes people so jumpy about it. And so I want to get in there, and I want to understand it, and make sense of it. So now that we know the reasons why I do this, I hope that these are reasons why you feel led to perpetuate conversations about race as well. And I want to give you a couple of tips for doing that, because we can't all just be like gloom and doom, why this sucks and blah. There has to be forward motion, right? So here are my tips. Number one is say something. Call out racism when you see it. Don't let it pass. Number 2, talk to people of color about their experiences. Don't let racism go by, but don't try and be the white knight championing the whole cause either. Talk to people of color about their experiences. And number 3 is listen to their replies. Don't offer excuses. Don't offer us your guilt. We don't want it. It's not helpful. Just listen and adjust your behavior accordingly. And that's it. That's why these conversations matter, and that's what you can do to make it better. It's funny to say that's it, because that's not it. This is such complicated stuff, and this is such a long video, and I'm getting so like, ugh. But I'm happy. I'm happy to be able to share this with people that find it useful. I'm happy to be able to share this even with people who don't find it useful, because it's being shared. Share, listen, peace.